Welcome to episode 3 in our Secure My Treasures podcast series. Today I'm with Nick Donnelly, who's from Plenary Wealth. For those of you joining us for the first time today, Secure My Treasures produces this podcast series as a community service. If you haven't heard of Secure My Treasures, it's a bank-grade secure digital safe where you can store all your important documents and allow those you trust to access it in any emergency. Secure My Treasures spares your family unnecessary distress and cost when your vital information is stored in any of our bespoke chests. Our guest is from Sydney, Nick Donnelly, who is no ordinary financial planner. Nick's expertise is helping people through life-changing transitions such as divorce, retirement, aged care, and of course, end of life. And today we're going to focus more at the end of life end when people find themselves alone after long relationships. Nick, it seems in some perhaps more traditional relationships, one person manages all the finances. Sometimes the other person neither holds the bank account nor has any access to it. I guess some people might be surprised by that. Are you able to talk us through how common this kind of arrangement might be?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, thanks very much for having me in there and the lovely intro. It's good to be here. But yeah, look, depending on the demographic, it can be really common. In my experience, in my line of work, probably the older the client, the more likely they are to have this type of arrangement. And it's probably, I don't know if access is the right word. It's probably less about access and more about knowledge in terms of if the partner who has no involvement in finances, if they needed to get access to cash or to an investment, it might very well be a joint bank account or a joint investment, but which bank is it? Which investment provider? What's the account number? It's those little pieces of knowledge that are going to make having that information is going to make it far simpler. Not having it is going to make it a little more stressful. There's typically nothing sinister, generally speaking, about that type of arrangement. Rather, certain roles within family dynamics, depending on the generation, lead to that. It's often not a case of holding all the keys, not preventing you from doing so. It's more just certain roles were defined by this. And these types of roles are pretty hard to change, even though we're in 2025.
And I guess it's cultural as well.
Yep, absolutely. That's right. You have certain people come and you can see one partner will be nodding along during a conversation, but you can tell that this person is the one that is involved, makes a lot of the decisions. This is the sort of the insecurity that people have when that partner goes in aged care or passes away. That's where the stress can come through. To answer your initial question, it's pretty common.
We've also heard a story, it's an old story actually, about a former politician who, on retiring, had apparently no visibility at all of his finances. Because everything was done for him, he had to learn to do everything, including how to use a debit card at an ATM. I've also heard
Mm.
that about other high-flying executives. Is that surprising to you?
No, not at all. And probably for the same reasons that I mentioned above, but more than anything, we're all products of our own environment. So if we understand the family dynamic, this is my responsibility, that is your responsibility, whether that's right or wrong, whatever it may be, you tend to stay in your wheelhouse. And often as you get older, they say old dogs, new tricks, that sort of thing, it can be even more difficult because you're so used to not having to do something, learning a new skill. I look at my dad, he lives alone and he struggled with a lot of those things that you and I find quite simple. But when you haven't had to do something for 30, 40, 50 years and all of a sudden a lot of things are thrust upon you, you've got to learn quickly and it can be pretty stressful. So they're not uncommon and not surprising to hear that story.
I feel for big stars, A-list stars, who've got people around them. What happens if that star fades?
Well, that's right. Hopefully they've got the right people around them to help
That's
them.
right. And just on that, it is about having the right people around you, not just the first available person, isn't it?
That's right. Older people have a certain amount of income or assets. If things go south or the wrong person realizes that they're vulnerable, there's no real backup plan. If the wrong person gets in their network, everything disappears, which happens increasingly in Australia, unfortunately. There is no real second chance. So there's a huge amount of vulnerability. They've got to be really careful. They're getting the right help from the right person that has their interests in heart, not their own.
That leads very nicely into my next question. What hap- what happens, say, at the end of life where a surviving partner has not previously been involved in managing the family finances? They must be bewildered and they're therefore vulnerable, and
Mm,
vulnerable in particular of being scammed. What would you
mm.
say about that?
Yeah, I think bewildered is definitely the sort of the first feeling, overwhelming bewildered. And often the scamming part, what I find with a lot of older clients is there's a little bit of a gap between when someone is attempting to scam a person and how they can recognize that. And I'll just say to my clients that if you get any email or any phone call from anyone that you're not sure about, don't give them any information and give me a call and explain what's happened. And I can take you through my opinion on it. It could be perfectly legitimate, but use me as an objective viewpoint. I have had elder clients who have been scammed and they've lost a couple of $1,000s. They're more embarrassed than anything else, as opposed to losing the money. They just think, I can't believe this happened to me.
Mm,
The way scams work is getting the right person on the right day at the right time.
mm.
They're sending out thousands of texts and phone calls just trying to catch the right person. And it does happen. But yeah, the bewildering, the overwhelming can then often lead to a vulnerability to scamming. And part of my job is helping people be aware that you have to be conscious of this stuff and use me as your objective sounding board.
That is very helpful. So
Yeah.
when they do find themselves holding the purse, so to speak,
Mm.
bewildered, worried about being scammed,
Mm.
is the first step they should take finding out how many bank accounts or how many share portfolios? Is that it? Or should they call you straight away?
Yeah, for most people, they'll go through this situation once in their life. And that's hard when you're a little bit older and piling grief on top of that as well. There's a lot of pressure on people when they hit this point. And I say to people, I'm involved in this stuff every day of the week. You'll do it once in your life. And like most things in life, if you have the time and the inclination to do it yourself, you can, or you can choose to outsource.
Mm.
Um, Typically, coming to me straight away is the best approach. And what most often happens is I'll get a phone call, typically from the adult child, saying, Dad's passed away, Mum's alone in the big house. He doesn't know what's going on. How do we get the house in order to start planning for the future? That's generally the introduction I'll have to these clients. We decide to meet up. And typically at that point, I'm handed reams of paper, reams of paper saying, we've gone through all the files and this is everything we can find. We're not sure what's active and what's not. Um, can you help us with that? And the answer is always yes. And that's a perfect starting point. I was handed AMP superannuation statements from, I think, 1993 and things like that. And that's normal. People keep everything. They keep all their paperwork that they want to throw out. It's perfectly fine to hand that across, but that gives you a good sort of idea of that level of complexity people have when they approach me. So I think first finding someone that you trust has done this before and then connecting with them because they can outline steps quite quickly about how we approach it. And straight away, you see people's shoulders relax a little bit. They're like, okay, great. I found someone that's done this before. I found someone that can help me. Let's move it forward. And look, we have ways of locating shares and investments and things like that if an individual doesn't have the paperwork. And often I'll have a client engaged in an ongoing basis and we've set everything up and they give me a call and say, oh, Nick, just got this in the mail and it's a $30,000 pension we didn't even know existed.
Mm.
That's fine. Let's put that together with everything else. It's getting the house in order at the start, but it'll be ongoing support because things continue to change as well.
Mm.
And I'll need help with that also.
What about when they don't know about the bank account that they buy the groceries from?
Yeah, look, it's like the cookie trail, right? So you say to people, well, what have you got? What paperwork do you have? Give me everything that you have. And then you start to about, okay, when you did buy groceries or groceries were being bought, how did it happen? Did your partner take cash? Did they take a card? Where is that card? Can you get me a copy of that? and you start to piece it together. Because once you have one bit of the puzzle, you can start to, myself and my team can start to piece together all from there. We find out the bank account, look at transactions, see money coming in, see money going out. What's this for? What's that for? And slowly but surely, you can start to piece the whole situation together.
And I guess building confidence in being able to manage the weekly budget, finance, incomings and outgoings is really important. So how do you help people to build their confidence in managing the finances going forward if they're the only partner and their
The
eldest?
first is accepting that they need help. Some people are fiercely independent. They think, I don't need to do it. I can do this myself. And that's a perfectly natural reaction, but it is a vulnerable time. There's other people that just can't accept help fast enough and hand everything over and say, here you go, start working on it. But the second step is probably what is really helpful is accepting that help should come from someone independent, because family dynamics can be really tricky. I see multiple siblings, each providing different levels of support, each different levels of relationships, and having someone objective and having their viewpoint is important, mostly because people are going to feel comfortable, but it also helps mitigate elder abuse because most elder abuse comes from those closest to older
Mhm.
Australians. So I advocate for getting independent help because I see it with the other professionals who work with lawyers, accountants, etc. We know what the red flags look like. And then that third step is contacting a professional who can help. But to answer your question, some people don't know what they'd spend. Part of piecing that together is going back through banking accounts, having a look in the last 12 months. This is what you spent money on. Do you think that'll be more or less in the future? Starting with the end in mind. People are often financially starting again in these situations. It can be pretty overwhelming. What do you want your situation to look like in the coming years? Do you want to just make sure I'll be comfortable if I've got $20,000 always accessible? I can pay for my groceries, my rego, council rates. That will give me a sense of security. So often that might be it. It could be something as simple as that, or it could be far more complex. But once we've got that end goal in mind, whether it's managing your cash flow or something more complex, we work backwards. So it could include managing investments or full superannuation, understanding their income needs, building confidence around that, building investments around it, managing social security entitlements, but also adopting for future changes too, downsizing, aged care, home care, retirement villages, things that might not happen for 6, 12 months. I've got a really identical situation to that right now where partner passed away 12 months ago. The remaining partner says the house seems too empty. It's too big. Doesn't necessarily need aged care, but they think I want to be part of a community again. So helping with those transitions and making decisions around that, giving clients support. Estate planning is a big part of it as well when you think more longer term. Older Australians, particularly in capital cities, generally have quite a bit of wealth, mostly around property. So it's making sure that if your will was done in 1970, we need to make sure we get that redone. Your assets are going to get to the right people and they're going to stay with them. Everyone's different. It might be something as simple as managing cash flow. But once you start to ask further questions about those things, like people say, actually, yep, I need help with that. I need help with that. And by the end, people feel confident that all bases are covered and they've always got me for support as things challenge.
That sounds very comforting. I'll just backtrack a little bit and
Yeah.
really highlight the independence people like yourself can offer
Mm,
when there might be a risk of elder abuse, as you pointed out. Most elder abuse starts in families. And when there's somebody independent advising an older
mm.
person what they should do with their money, it's perhaps makes it harder for an adult child to implement their inheritance impatience.
Yeah. It's a fine line for an advisor when you start to potentially observe elder abuse, because by the time a client comes to me at age 80, 85, and they've got an adult child who's 40, 50, let's call it, there's decades of relationships there. My job isn't to drive a wedge between that, but my job is just to make sure that if I'm identifying something, that I'm making that individual aware of it. What I need to be careful of is that if I go gung ho with this and say, your son is ripping you off, your daughter is ripping you off, barriers can come up quickly because most elder Australians think my son or daughter would never do that. In the vast majority of cases, that is correct. But when it's not, That's the worst part of elder abuse. It's those nearest and dearest that are the villains here. So making sure I'm not going too hard, because the family could say, I don't think you should deal with Nick anymore. He's pushing you in this
Mhm.
direction. We're not comfortable with it. Let's go elsewhere. I
Mm.
need to be careful that
Yeah.
I'm not being pushed out of the equation, and someone who's elder abusing someone is using me as that excuse to
Mm.
continue what they're doing. What amazes me with elder abuse more than anything is I had a situation last year where there was a couple of adult children. The elderly lady wanted to give one $20,000. That's perfectly fine. It's your money. I'm certainly not going to tell you what to do with that. Anyway, gave the $20,000, and then she called me back a few weeks later and said that because I gave him 20,000, I have to give him 20,000 as well. I said, okay. And she said, do I have to? I said, well, no, absolutely not. This is your money and you can decide whom you give it to and
Mm.
where. If you start going through your money to the point where you're going to be relying on a full age pension, I will tell you and I'll make it really clear if I have concerns. Inheritance
Mm.
and guilt about not giving money to their adult children when they've given it to one of the others. In no way, shape, or form should that conversation ever happen, but it does. People need to be aware of it, and hopefully having myself as just someone you can talk to about it will prevent.
I think that independence is really important. I have written previously about elder abuse as part of my work with Secure My Treasures. One of the things that is well known is that older people do not report elder abuse. They prefer to put up with it because of the fear of losing the love that you may wonder if they have anyway.
I think you had, I don't know if you could do that to anyone that you truly love. It does seem to happen, doesn't it?
Mm.
It's incredible that we're probably seeing a prevalence of it because estates are so big now for older Australians. And what I often see is decisions adult children make can lead to them thinking that inheritance is really my only way to fix this problem.
Mm.
As soon as that's in someone's mind, the moral compass starts spinning, and that's often where you see the non-reporting is probably the scariest part because we only see what we see.
Mm.
How much more is it happening? Probably a huge amount, like you mentioned.
So there's people who, even with your help, don't like handling the finances or would be very reluctant to do. How could you and your team at Plenary Wealth help them?
Yeah, I get touching on a couple of other points I mentioned. First is helping them managing investments. Often superannuation is something that they talk about that clients come to me for help with because they're just not sure how it works and what they should be doing with it. Well, starting with the end in mind is probably the best approach. What income do you need? What are your goals? What do you want to make sure you get for the rest of your life in terms of finances? What's going to give you that security? And then working backwards from there. And also just making sure they're aware of when we make decisions, maybe around investments or cash flow, what's the likelihood of aged care in the future? Aged care in Australia is really expensive. So we don't want to make a decision which might be a specific decision around investment, but we're going to need a significant amount of money to pay for aged care in a couple of years' time. If I know what someone needs, we can work backwards from there to create a plan that continues to move over the years, supporting someone through every transition, not just now going to aged care, but also as their life changes. So we often say to clients, look, i- if it relates to money in a signature, we like to think that we've seen it before and we can help you. If it's outside of our scope, we've got professionals in our network, like people like yourself, who've got the services and the expertise to give you the same type of help I can.
Oh, thank you. We better tell listeners how they can contact you, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. You can email me. That's nick at plenarywealth.com.au. LinkedIn, everyone can get me there, or they can contact me as well, 0431 311 003. So call or email is probably the easiest way to reach out.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Our listeners will very much appreciate your tips on what to do if they suddenly find themselves in charge of the finances. Please head over to the Secure My Treasures YouTube channel or have a look at the podcast page on our website to find out more. That's at www.securemytreasures.com.